Hey everyone, I hope you're all well. I thought I'd take a moment to do an outline of the scenario response essay for HSP 405. In case you don't already know, I like daggy little graphics that I like to put on my slides to sort of show the types of things that you'll be doing in a particular assignment. So for this one, you'll need to be doing a bit of research at computers and a library, that sort of stuff. And you'll need to be able to do this quite broadly around the scenario itself, right? And then you'll need to be able to think through, are there any policies, any legislation, all of that type of stuff, even places like Emergency Management Victoria and the manual that they have, all of those things, and how do they link in with what you're doing. And then, of course, you type it all up in your essay format. Just a quick reminder, as per usual, that you have two assessments that you're submitting to UTAS, and this is one of them. This is the scenario response essay, which is due at the end of week 6 on Friday, and you need to upload it to the Milo site by midnight. And the Milo site does actually have the specific due date on there for you, as does the slides. Your word count is 2,000 words, but this excludes your reference list, and your weighting is at 30% for this particular task. So what you need to do is think through this scenario. You're an inspector with Victoria Police. You receive information from the BOM, Bureau of Meteorology, that indicates a severe thunderstorm and associated high-intensity rainfall event is headed towards the coast of Victoria and will likely most directly impact the Gippsland Lakes region. This event has been preceded by unseasonal heavy rainfall across Victoria, with an average of well above 150 millimetres of rain in most areas every month. After this heavy rainfall from 7 a.m. that morning and substantially high winds, by 3 p.m. on this particular day, runoff from the heavy rain begins to flood low-lying areas in Gippsland Lakes. By 8 p.m, the combination of heavy rainfall and winds of approximately 110 kilometres an hour has created a storm surge headed towards the coast, and the lakes have broken their banks, causing substantial widespread flooding, and the waters are continuing to rise rapidly. There are reports from some areas of, insert the surrounding suburbs in the Gippsland region, that people are trapped in their businesses and homes. Calls are being received from police, Calls are being received from people who are standing on the roofs of buildings, reporting that flood waters are rising rapidly and they are concerned for their lives. So, on the basis of that particular scenario, you would need to do quite a bit of research to read about, flooding and all of that sort of stuff, and all of the legislation and policies that are related to it, etc., etc. So, with reference to the Emergency Management Victoria manual, the Emergency Management Act, and any other material you deem relevant, you need to consider and articulate what your actions should actually happen in this environment to protect lives and property in dealing with the incident. You need to focus primarily on the strategic considerations, decisions and actions of Victoria Police in collaboration with Emergency Management Victoria and other emergency responders in a whole of government setting. A secondary focus could be the tactical management of the issues. In your analysis, think in generic terms of this incident on any city within the state of Victoria. Then you need to draw on and apply set readings from the unit and wider research literature that you find using the library databases, Google Scholar, all of that sort of stuff to inform your response. And of course, you need to reference your response as well. So, in terms of structure for this assignment then, we have a couple of ways of doing it. And because I like structure, I like to give you at least one of them to give you a sense of how you might put it together. So I've got one here that talks about just having a 200-word introduction where you have, one good paragraph, a nice block paragraph, not a series of like sentences of one line, a good block paragraph. Make sure you include an intro to the topic and a roadmap of the different points that you're going to make in each section. So the first section we'll discuss, the second section we'll consider, the third section we'll examine. Finally, the essay will conclude. So really signpost it out and make it clear. Then you could focus on looking at the relevant legislation, plans and agency policies in dealing with the incidents. And you've got about 600 words, 1,600 words to do that. So you might like to structure it in terms of the key things that VicPol should do, are planning to do within the context of the legislation, plans, reviews. You might consider structuring in terms of a couple of subheading. So strategic considerations, decisions and actions of VicPol in a whole of government setting, and tactical management of the specific problem, and about 800 words for each. And then we move on to the conclusion, which is where you summarise your main points again, and you can use a similar approach to what you used in the introduction in terms of just overviewing a topic, then road mapping out what you've talked about, and then talking about, what the future holds, basically. And then, of course, you need a list of references, and you can choose whatever referencing style you like. We have got an alternative structure which breaks down the discussion in the middle a little bit differently. What are the key issues at this time? What is the response strategy going to be and why? What is my mission? What are the priorities and why? What instructions am I going to give and to whom? And what else should I consider at this stage? So that might be something that you can divide your 1,600 words across those different areas, just as an alternative way of thinking about it. So what past issues did students have with this particular assignment? What was done not so well? So a lot of people didn't use 1.5 line spacing. It's really crucial so that we can put the comments in easily. Not a lot of people used full paragraphs with 5 or more sentences. A lot of people just used 2 sentence paragraphs. That's not paragraphs, it's incomplete. A lot of people didn't include their discussions and examples about the decision making that they would do and the response to the scenario. This is absolutely crucial. It's a major part of what you're doing in your assessment. A lot of people focused on describing and listing the legislation and agency policies to the neglect of discussion of the key points of the application of those legislative frameworks and policies. So the application of practical knowledge to the scenario. This has to be the key thing that you're doing in your discussion. A lot of people also weren't connecting their decisions with references to research literature and or legislative frameworks or policies. So make sure that you're doing that as well. And of course, linking in that broader research knowledge around emergency management and critical incidents is really, really vital in this circumstance. And certainly, given it's a flood scenario, focusing on research that looks at flooding. And some people didn't use subheadings. This is a really good way to earmark the different sections to make sure you haven't forgotten anything in your response. Now, when I conducted this session with some students face-to-face, we talked about brainstorming the strategic considerations and the tactical management of the problem. And when we did that, I took a bunch of photos of the whiteboard so that people could get a sense of the types of things that they needed to consider. Now, this was around a fire-based scenario, but you can see the different areas that they've covered off on: social, political, technical, the recovery, environmental, economic, all of that sort of stuff. In addition to the tactical, legal, all of those sorts of things. So just keep that in the back of your mind when you're thinking about the different types of things that you need to include in your response. So some basic tips. It's okay to use first-person language. Make sure you know and understand the role of Emergency Management Victoria. The Emergency Management Manual Victoria is very important as well. and of course the Emergency Management Act. You need to be able to cite these things in your work and understand how they're being applied. It's also important to think about how VicPol would talk to other agencies as first response agencies in this scenario, and any other elements of emergency management within Victoria Police. Start by reading the core readings I've given you, but extend on this by finding additional readings, particularly research literature about flooding. And it might also be useful to have a look at significant inquiry documents and so forth to help guide your knowledge and thought about this specific incident. Be sure to include specific examples, discussions about your own decision making so your links are really clear. Make sure you connect the examples of your own practice with research literature. This is how you analyse. So if you just talk about what you're going to do, that's description. It's not analysing what you're doing. It's really important that you link what you're going to do with the research literature. You know, Smith says this is a really good way of making sure that your team is working together, or ensuring that they're not dying of starvation during managing that critical incident. Including one reference per paragraph is always a good way of making sure that you've got enough references and that you're feeding in your research literature enough. And make sure you use a standard essay structure. So what does your rubric say? We're applying theories and research literature related to emergency management about the critical incident. We're articulating the core police judgment and decision making that needs to be made related to a specific critical incident. And we're also articulating the key considerations around effective communication. And this would also include with different collaborating organisations and other first response organisations too. And finally, of course, it's just the usual communication stuff. Are you addressing the set task? For instance, you're writing an essay rather than a literature review. You will fail if you don't address the set task. Using appropriate expressions, spelling, grammar. So you've got an introduction, you've got a body of the essay, you've got good paragraphs, you've got a clear conclusion, that sort of stuff. And of course, attributing the work of others correctly using referencing. This is a little reminder that you need to make sure that you're thinking about how you're going to structure your essay. You've got information and resources up online that I walk you through. Make sure you use those in order to structure your essay and you don't actually forget any specific parts. So I thought I'd give you some example paragraphs from a previous student's response so you can see the types of things that have been done really well in these. It really comes down to paragraph structure a lot of the time and thinking through what you're putting in there. So for instance, we've got a good introduction here, and it is a fairly a high level student. I think they got a high distinction. Just introducing the scenario particularly. In this instance, it was about, bushfires. Then giving a roadmap of your specific points. I will draw on literature to talk about this. The context of this paper is an emerging fire. The fire hasn't actually occurred. The paper is divided into two parts. In the first bit, I will focus on blah, blah, blah. In the second bit, I will focus on the tactical management. Finally, I'll conclude by emphasising. That's great. It's exactly what you need. Nice, clear, to the point. A good paragraph out of the middle of the essay. I've given you one here about public information. So they start off with a couple of topic sentences about public information. Then they go on to talk about the key issues that might emerge in this specific scenario in relation to public information. And you can see that they have read a lot of research literature about this and they've linked it in all the way through. And then finally, they'll say to achieve the provision of effective public information, Victoria Police would need to ensure information was accessible, timely and accurate. So a nice sort of summarising point before moving on to the next paragraph. This is how you get your vertical thread. And then we've got a nice exemplary conclusion here. Again, just overviewing the general discussion. Then they overview each point that they've discussed. Firstly, I talked about this. Second, I covered this. Thirdly, I examined this. Finally, I concluded that blah. It's really clear that we need to consider widely these types of flood scenarios in future, because it's important for Victoria Police to be prepared, or whatever it is. However you're going to end your conclusion is completely fine in that respect. So that's it from me. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at any time, and I shall catch you all at the residentials. See you later.